So like I mentioned in a few of my previous videos, I just finished rereading Wuthering Heights for the first time since high school, and since that is a big film adaptation that is coming out soon, I am going to use that as we talk about film adaptations in general. A lot of people do want it to be exactly like the book, and for one, that's impossible because as we're all reading, we are all bringing our own past experience and preferences and biases to the text. So we are all seeing a different film of the movie in our minds as we read it. A director and a writer cannot recreate that 100% accurately to satisfy every person who has ever read the book. And I wanted to preemptively do a video about book adaptations in film because there's obviously a lot of controversy online in the book community, especially about some of the choices that have been made with this adaptation in particular. And there's a lot of speculation around what it's actually going to be like. And as somebody that loves the book Wuthering Heights and has heard Emerald talk about how much she loves Wuthering Heights, I just thought that this was a good opportunity to talk about that before the film actually comes out. I analyze and critique books all the time, but I'm not an expert in doing that about film, and so I'm not going to do that about the film. I just want to talk about generally the concept of what it means to adapt a book into a screenplay and a film, and maybe how we should be looking at it. Because we hear it all the time, right? People see a movie based on a book. There's always complaints. That's not how I imagined it. They left out my favorite scene. This isn't accurate. And sometimes there are truly bad adaptations, and that's another conversation. But I think sometimes we lose the plot and the wrong criteria to evaluate adaptations when really they are their own standalone pieces of art. And I just want to talk about why I think this and get into it a little bit and have a conversation about it. If any of you have different thoughts, drop it in the comments. And if you like these sorts of videos, again, to welcome you, I'm Lindy. I am a writer, MFA grad, and tech content strategist. I love books, and beneath that, I love storytelling and analyzing how it shows up in our culture, the way stories impact us all in our culture, and why they matter. So if you like that sort of thing, hit subscribe, like the video to support, and yeah, let's get into it. So like I mentioned in a few of my previous videos, I just finished rereading Wuthering Heights for the first time since high school, and since that is a big film adaptation that is coming out soon, I am going to use that as we talk about film adaptations in general. So first, let's talk about what is a film adaptation really. I think this is where a lot of the confusion starts. It's not meant to be a visual, literal transcription of the book itself, in my opinion. It's not the book with pictures. An adaptation is a completely separate work of art created by a different artist. Sometimes that's a different writer and director combo. Sometimes the person directing the movie also wrote it based on the plot of the book. In the case of Wuthering Heights, that's what Emerald Fennell did. She wrote it and is directing it. And for context, she is also the writer and director of Promising Young Woman and Saltburn. That will come up later as I am discussing this. And they're both really great movies, so if you haven't seen them, I highly recommend seeing them before going to see Wuthering Heights. So again, it's a separate work of art, and it is inspired by the source material, aka the book. Let's give an example. When a musician does a cover of a song made popular by another band in the past, we don't expect it to sound exactly the same. And actually, a lot of the time, personally, I end up hating it if it sounds too much like the original. I want something different with the essence of the original. I don't know about you, but it's their interpretation of it. A remake example might be Gus Van Sant's remake of Psycho, where he did it shot by shot, exactly like the original, by Alfred Hitchcock. And people hated it. There was nothing new. There's an argument made that if you are going to remake or adapt something, you should be bringing another lens, angle, or element to it. And I agree with that argument. But a lot of the time in the discourse, when people talk about book adaptations, a lot of people do want it to be exactly like the book. And for one, that's impossible because as we're all reading, We are all bringing our own past experience and preferences and biases to the text. So we are all seeing a different film of the movie in our minds as we read it. A director and a writer cannot recreate that 100% accurately to satisfy every person who has ever read the book. They are bringing their experience of reading the book to us and giving us another piece of art to interact with. And that's pretty cool. There's also the fact that books and film are obviously just very different forms of art. There are different limitations and strengths to each. They don't correlate and overlap perfectly. They can't. A book, for example, can spend pages describing a landscape or a character's personality and looks, where a film has to do that really quickly in a shot or two usually. The film has to make concrete what the book is able to leave ambiguous sometimes, in a lot of cases. A look, a gesture somebody makes, the book can allude to something very subtly, whereas the film has to show you really quickly and in a very concrete way so that the audience gets it, most of the time. So again, when you're adapting a book to film, you are translating and bringing the audience your version of how you saw it as you were reading it. You're interpreting, not translating verbatim. Making a million creative choices about what the story means from your own personal point of view, which is so unique to each of us. What is the book really about? What past pieces of art are you bringing as an artist to it as you're reading it and visualizing it? And how do you want that portrayed on the screen? Those choices would be different for almost everybody. Again, not every person that has read and loved a book can be completely satisfied by a film adaptation for all of those reasons, unless we adjust our expectations, which I think is important, and I think we should, and that's why I'm making this video. We're talking about Wuthering Heights, for example. A lot of the adaptations done in the past actually only cover the first half of the book. If you haven't read Wuthering Heights, it is in 2 parts. It's really long. It's a dense book. It's complicated. There's a lot of nuance to the story. And yeah, a lot of the past adaptations only cover that first half and maybe a little bit of the second. And I have a suspicion that Emerald is going to attempt to cover some of the second, but I'm not entirely sure. I don't know what to expect there, but I'm excited to see what choice she makes. And that first half of the book is largely about Catherine and Heathcliff. Spoiler alert, I think a lot of people have already read the book. It's very, very old, so I'm just gonna say it. The second half is about Heathcliff's son and Cathy's daughter a little bit more. Heathcliff is in there as a main character still, but yeah. Book is often framed as a romance. After rereading it recently, again, and I do remember this from the first time I read it as well, the book is really about rage and the toxic side of love and addiction and abuse. And so it is interesting that a lot of the adaptations and a lot of the way it's portrayed and marketed as a book even seems to be as a romance. It's talked about like this great romance. Even Emerald's version, they are using the title in the trailers, the greatest love story of all time. And I have a lot of feelings and thoughts on that. I know a lot of people do. I also have some thoughts on maybe why they are using that tagline to market it. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, again, these are all just creative choices. Not everyone's going to agree. There was a recent interview with Emerald talking about how she wanted to distill the way that she felt reading the book for the first time when she was 14 years old. That leads me to believe that maybe she is making the choice to romanticize it. A 14-year-old would view the behavior of Heathcliff and Cathy very differently than an adult who has been in complicated relationships. So I'm curious to see what that looks like in the film. But again, that is her very specific point of view and attachment to the book, and those are the reasons that she is making some of the choices that she chose to make in adapting it. So let's talk some more about the myth of fidelity when it comes to book adaptations from a few different angles. Let's start with casting. That's one of the big controversies around this Wuthering Heights adaptation. In the book Wuthering Heights, Heathcliff is described explicitly as having a dark complexion, and there are inferences of him being black or Romani, and that's part of him being othered in the book. The choice to cast Jacob Elordi has ruffled a lot of feathers for that reason. Second, that a director and their casting director make choices about who will take on certain roles for a book adaptation, that is very concrete interpretive choice. They're deciding this is what this character looks like and sounds like and acts like, and that evokes a lot of feelings for people that love a book for any adaptation. The face of that actor becomes associated in the broader culture with that particular character for a long time, if not forever. There's also some controversy about Margot Robbie playing Catherine or Kathy, on how she's described in the book and her age versus what Margot Robbie looks like and her age. I think that these criticisms and this conversation is always valid, of course. I have some thoughts about maybe why these choices were made. And they're still a little bit problematic. I don't know if it explains it away. I'm curious to hear more about what Emerald has to say about those choices. I kind of wonder if some of it has to do, or a lot of it has to do, with the politics of Hollywood and the fact that Jacob Elordi is such a huge rising star and they wanted him in it for marketing and publicity. Sometimes, unfortunately, with art, he's a great actor and I like him. I'm not saying he shouldn't get any particular role. I've liked him in everything I've seen him in, but again, based on what Heathcliff is described as looking like in the book versus who Jacob Elordi is, it's quite different, and it is a very hardline choice, it seems, in a lot of ways. But I do think that when you get corporate money and oversight involved in art projects, sometimes decision makers are pushed into making choices that they wouldn't have otherwise. And I think that that's an entirely different conversation within the film industry, within the book publishing industry, that I'm not going to get into too deep here, but it's just something to keep in mind when casting comes up. I think that there's a lot at play that the director doesn't always have complete control over. She has worked with Jacob in the past in Saltburn. I think she likes him. She's worked with Margot Robbie. Margot Robbie actually helped produce Saltburn. So I think that there are ties there as well. And I'm excited to see what they are like as Heathcliff and Catherine. I mean, I'm going to go into it with an open mind, but again, casting is a director making a very concrete choice, artistic choice. And again, it's one of those things that a lot of people would probably make a variety of different choices around that wouldn't satisfy everyone. I remember when Twilight was adapted, like forever ago, when I was way younger, and a lot of people were like, that's not how I picture that character. And it's like, yeah, we all have a different picture in our minds. But again, going against what is explicitly said in the text, I can see how that can raise some questions, and I think that that's valid too. There is also something to be said for Heathcliff being described the way he is and the sort of otherness that comes up in the narrative around that. It explains how he behaves later in the book in a lot of ways. It raises class and race discussions that are important, and there is a question around if the person playing him in 2026 is a white man, does that take away from that important piece of the narrative? I think that audiences do give a lot of leeway and try to go in with an open mind a lot of the time, despite the complaints about it, not meeting their expectations often. But I think that this is one area where a question does arise there. I was actually really obsessed with Emerald's movie Promising Young Woman when it came out, and I just was noting that she was very intentional in the way that she cast the men in that movie. She cast a lot of fun-loving comedian types that were well known to the public very intentionally. I don't want to give away the plot of that movie, but they end up being kind of completely opposite characters, and she did that with a lot of intention so that she could send a message to the audience. So with that in mind, I also think the casting of Heathcliff and Kathy are worth thinking about and talking about, because she has been so intentional with why she has cast certain people in the past and talked very extensively about that in interviews. So I don't think it's oversight or an accident. She has a reason. And I had some thoughts too about, she does cast other actors of color within the film. So it's not an all white cast. She's not completely whitewashing the whole thing. But I have questions around that too. The two actors of color play the two really only good people roles in the whole book, from my point of view. That a flattening too, to have it that way? I don't know. Another interesting thing to note, there was an interview that Emerald did at the Bronte Women's Writing Festival in 2025 where she was asked directly about her choice to cast Jacob Elordi, and she said that he looked exactly like how she had imagined him when she read the book. She has also recently said, as I mentioned earlier, that she wanted to make this film, her vision was really about distilling how she felt reading the book when she was 14 for the first time. So that has a lot to do with it too, probably. And I don't know that I agree. But again, I'm not the one doing the adaptation, so it's not my choice to make. She also spoke to the fact that Margot Robbie embodies the personality of Catherine, and I can see that argument. I can get behind that and be okay with that. Another clear decision that a director and writer has to make when adapting a book, like we touched on a little earlier, is what to cut. You can't possibly have every single thing in the book, 400-page novel, in a 2-hour movie. It is impossible. And that is actually, side note, why I'm excited that some books are being adapted into longer TV series. I think maybe you can do it that way, but in a 2-hour film, there's not enough time or room. So a director and a writer have to decide what is not going to make it into the film. And like I mentioned earlier, based on Emerald's comment that she wanted to distill how she felt reading it when she was 14, I do have a suspicion that it is going to be highly romanticized. Again, another highly romanticized version of the novel. And you know, having seen the trailer too, I think it's going to be really beautiful, and I've loved her past 2 films. So again, I'm going to try to go in with an open mind. I wish that there could be a TV series version of this to really get into all of it, because I think purely just romanticizing it and stripping away all of the darkness in the second half of the book takes away from the true impact and meaning of the entire book itself. And I think that's why people have been so upset after seeing these trailers and been disappointed by past adaptations. And I get that. Again, though, it's impossible to do it perfectly and satisfy everyone. And so I think, you know, going in and viewing it for what it is, with the context in mind of why it is the way that it is, can maybe allow us to appreciate it just, again, as its standalone piece of art. Because it can't be the book. It can't be perfectly true to the book and make us all happy. It just can't. That is a tonal choice that a director and writer have to make as well. When we read a book based on what's going on in our lives and what we are thinking about and focusing on the most, we take different things from that book, right? There might be even specific messages or things the author had in mind that we might not pick up on and get something completely different. That's why, you know, when you reread a book, I don't know about you, but when I reread a book, I get something different from it every time. And that's the joy and the beauty in revisiting books that I love. So there's something there too. There's a core message, a feeling, a tone that for whatever reason, the writer and director read the book and that is what they're going to bring to you. And that might not be the same thing that you got from it. Like me, again, rereading Wuthering Heights, it's a very dark book. That's what I got from it. I got that it was a conversation about class and abuse and toxicity and rage and revenge. And I don't know, but that is not the focus of what the movie is going to be. And I've accepted that, you know? We all view art differently. We all have our own different interpretations, and that doesn't make any of it right or wrong or bad or good. That's what makes it interesting to talk about books and art. And so, yeah, it's just that writer-director's interpretation, and we can bring the context of having read the book ourselves to viewing it, but there also has to be this balance of understanding that their point of view may not match our point of view, and how can we view it just as its own thing and appreciate it as its own thing. So that's where, when somebody might argue this film is a faithful adaptation of the book, what that really means is this aligns with my interpretation of the book. And that doesn't make it right or wrong either, but that's probably not going to be true for every person. Other person might have imagined the characters differently. Even if they're described concretely in the book, they might have had different themes stand out to them and felt different emotions while reading it. Another quote from Emerald at the Bronte Women's Writing Festival in 2025 was about it evoking feelings of it being primal and sexual and romantic. Those elements are present in the book. They just weren't what stood out to me, and that's okay. I can see where she is getting that from. And there's also, you know, a big trend in our culture right now with a real draw for reading romantasy and romance novels. And that is a clear marketing choice in a way as well. It is very lustful and primal and sexual and romantic. And I think coming at it from that lens and going into the movie knowing that, it'll be a fun movie. I'm excited to see it. I think that all of her films are so beautiful cinematically. I think looking at it and appreciating it in that way, the costumes look amazing. So yeah, just having the context and appreciating the thing for what it is and what is good and interesting about it can maybe make it more enjoyable, rather than going in and being like, I'm obsessed with this book, this is my book, it has to be exactly how I want it to be. But Promising Young Woman and Saltburn both really have dark, gothic, twisty themes, and I think that she will bring that out in this adaptation, which is very present for me personally in reading the novel. I think it'll be there in the film still, just maybe not in the ways that I would have chosen to do it or expected, but I think that she does the gothic and the modern gothic really well, and she has shown that in her past writing in films. So I think I'll be satisfied in that way. I think all of us will, if that's something that's important to us. I think it will be interesting to see how she does that, because the trailers primarily have been centered around that sexual, lusty aspect of it, which I love and I'm excited about. But yeah, I want to see more how she brings in the dark, the creepy, the sinister. It's Emerald Fennell. It will be there in some way or another, even if she's not centering it, and that makes me happy. So yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what does make a good adaptation. Now that we've talked extensively about what an adaptation is and why people constantly complain about the book being better than the film, because of course the book is better than the film. It has more time to draw you in and describe things and evoke emotion. A film is a different thing. And I think that I appreciate adaptations more when I view them as a separate thing. But what does make a good adaptation? I think an understanding of what works in its own medium. So what will work on film. The director and the writer know what film can do that the book cannot. We've talked a lot about what the book can do that the film can't. Now, what can the film do that the book can't? There's music, there's editing, there's performance. It's not about cramming in every plot point and scene in the book. You have a limited time to tell this story and evoke a certain emotion with those other elements. Some of the best adaptations make really big changes and diverge from the book because they understand that. Shining, for example, Stephen King has said he doesn't particularly like the film adaptation of his book, but he understands also that it is a different thing, like we have talked about. Stanley Kubrick understood what would work for cinema to make that story horrifying. So he made changes so that it would come across through film the way that the book does to a reader. And it's stunning. It's a really cool film. If you haven't seen that one, highly recommend that also. On the other end of the spectrum, I just actually saw a post this morning that Lydia Yuknovich did about Kristen Stewart's recent adaptation of her memoir, The Chronology of Water. And she just saw a screening and she was raving about it. She loves it. She was so excited about it. I'm really excited to see that film because I loved that book. But yeah, sometimes it translates even for the author, right? Like sometimes it might translate and sometimes it might not. And maybe that's because the writer-director is getting it exactly how it was in the writer's mind, or maybe it's because they're coming to it understanding that it's a completely different art form, completely different medium, and its own standalone project. And are the core elements that are most important there? Is it evoking the right tone and emotion? I also think a good adaptation has a very clear artistic vision of its own, which I think Emerald has explicitly stated this will, and it does, and she's explained what that is. Even if it diverges from the book itself, what is it trying to say? How is it trying to say it? I think visually with Wuthering Heights, this film, there is a very concrete point of view. I think that what Emerald is trying to elicit and capture with this film is very clearly defined, as we have discussed already. So I think it will be really cool. Also think a good adaptation engages with the book meaningfully, which ties into the other 2 points, right? It's in conversation with the book. Think about this in another way. What's a good one? I can think of a few. Bridget Jones' Diary. That is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice. Is it step by step the exact same? No. It's drastically different in a lot of ways, but it captures the heart and the cultural commentary and the struggle to find meaningful connection and relationships really well. Still, it captures the essence and the meaning of the story in a new, fresh way. And that's a book-to-book adaptation, right? And so I think if the film is doing that, that's a good adaptation. And again, the film is a standalone piece of art of its own. And I personally, this might be controversial, I think it should be viewed just as that and judged just as that, as a film. Is it good as a film? I don't think that it should be viewed necessarily as an adaptation, almost, when we're critiquing it. Is it a good movie? Do you enjoy watching it? Do you take something from it? Is it pleasing to look at? Is the cinematography good? Is the acting good? Is the music good? Is the editing good? Is the writing still good in its own way? I like looking at movies that way rather than does it capture the book perfectly in how I viewed it, because I understand that the writer and director are their own person and they read it and saw different things than me. And that's kind of cool, because really ultimately the book is serving 2 audiences. It's serving the people that read and loved the book and the people who never read the book and want to enjoy the story. And obsessing over literal step-by-step accuracy only really serves the first group, and not even really them, for reasons we have already discussed extensively. Only people, if you're viewing the film through that lens, that will be satisfied are the people that saw the book in their minds the exact same way that the writer and director did, which is going to be a very small group of people. So I get it. In talking about adaptations through the lens of Wuthering Heights, I get why there's some controversy. I can understand why people complain about book adaptations in film. But you hear it all the time, right? The book was better. It left out this scene. I didn't see the characters that way. And I think complaining about it and doing that every time just kind of detracts from the enjoyment and the experience of taking in the film just as what it is. And again, sometimes there are really horrible adaptations. I personally can't think of anything. This is how I typically view film adaptations, but I'm sure that there are. I'm sure there are some good arguments. But for the most part, I think that it can make the films more enjoyable if we view them this way. I actually think that the films that come along and make really bold, different choices that are not in the book can enrich our understanding of the text itself by highlighting parts of it that we didn't notice when we read it, raising questions that we didn't ask when we read it, and showing us possibilities and giving us imagery that we didn't imagine when we read it. So it can only add to it and deepen our understanding of the book itself, I think. Yeah, I wrote a little bit more about this and some of my takeaways from my reread of Wuthering Heights on my Substack this week. So if you are interested in that, the link is below. I would love to hear your thoughts and comments on this before going to see the movie, or on adaptations in general, or after you see the movie. I'm not going to do an analysis of the film itself because critiquing film is not within my area of expertise. I'm just going to go and appreciate it and enjoy it. But if you have thoughts, drop them below. I'd love to see what you're thinking about it going into it, or film adaptations that you think did not do a good job and why, or films you did love and why. Hit subscribe and come back next week to talk more about books and stories and how they impact and shape our culture and perception of things. Bye.